Hello and welcome to this episode of Ways to Change Your Workplace with myself, Prina Shah. And I'm really excited to be speaking with my guest today, who is Jo Alilovic. And Jo, welcome.
Thank you.
I've got a little bit of an intro to you, if I may.
Sure.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, Jo is the director and founder of 3D HR Legal and the author of Homeforce, which is a book about workplace flexibility. And Jo has just received her first copies recently, which is super exciting. Show us. Yes, we're going to be talking about that and so much more today with Jo. Jo practices what she preaches. She has managed a distributed, flexible team over the last 5 years. So it's been a long time, Jo. Jo also hosts a podcast called The Juggle. And personally, I have had the help of Jo long ago when I was working in a corporate as the general manager of people and culture. And I wanted to make some changes respectfully in our workplace. And I heard about Jo from my manager and a number of other people. And Jo was just amazing with how you helped me back in the day. So I've known Jo since then, and I'm really excited to be talking to Jo today about so much. But before I begin with my questions, Jo, welcome. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. It's hard to know where to start. I guess the starting point is that the reason I'm here is because, like you, I love helping businesses go from people problems to teams that get results. And usually that involves helping them create thriving cultures. You know, I remember when I first started out as an employment lawyer about 20 years ago, this idea of culture to me just sounded so wishy-washy, and that's just, what are people talking about? It's all about the law and it's all about what you have to do and what you need to do. This culture thing, it doesn't make any sense. But as I've gone through and I guess matured as a person as well and experienced different working environments, I am such a believer now in the importance of culture. And I think a lot of clients are often really surprised when we start talking and I start talking to them about culture, and they kind of look at me and think, but hang on, we called you in as the employment lawyer and you're talking to us about culture. So that's kind of fun when I have those conversations. But yeah, I guess that's where it all started, being an employment lawyer for 20 years, starting my own business coming up 6 years ago now, and making the decision to do that in a different way than the traditional law firm model.
And what is your different way, if you can expand on that?
Sure. Well, I started remote. So it was all about working from home to start with, and it was just me. And then when I decided to recruit, I decided to keep that going. So it was, if you would like to work from home and you would like to work flexibly, then let's do that. So the flexibility that we worked on back then was, and still really is, very much about not just where, but when. So we were able to, work around the individual needs as well as making sure that it fit with our client needs as well. And then there got to be more flexibility around how people are working as well. And so every new member that I've taken on, everyone has always been virtual and remote. We've had people working in other states of Australia, and generally it's worked really well.
Amazing. And for our global listeners, Jo, I just want to iterate that you live in Perth in Western Australia, which is where I live as well. And the state we live in is a very lucky place at the moment. We've got this safe bubble protecting us from the pandemic. As we speak, as we record this conversation, we have 0 community transmission within our state of Western Australia. Our workplaces, Jo, are working as normal. So people commute to work, they work 9 to 5 within the office.
Yeah.
There's no restrictions, we don't have any masks, we don't have any social distancing, nothing. So
yeah.
We're pretty much living in a pre-pandemic life.
Yes.
Whilst everything else is happening around us.
Yeah, we wouldn't know any different except for the fact that we can't fly out of here and expect to come back in.
Yeah, that's it, right? But from that perspective, Jo, I find it really, really fascinating. So the sociologist in me, my first degree was in sociology. I'm like, case study, come on.
Yeah.
I don't believe anyone has looked at us, Perth, Western Australia, from a case study perspective, and especially from the kind of work that we do from a workplace case study perspective in relation to flexibility, in relation to culture, in relation to what might come, how things have to change, what the future holds for Western Australia, specifically speaking today. So it's a fascinating space. I knew that you were the person that I wanted to talk to about it, Jo. So thank you so much for your time. So like you said, our borders are closed for now. That's not going to last forever, Jo. And then what happens from a workplace perspective? What are your thoughts? Or first, actually, before we even talk about that, what are your thoughts about the beautiful case study and the bubble that we're living in at the moment?
I think, like you said, we're isolated. We are the most isolated capital city in the world. So we started with that, and you can look at our neighbour New Zealand and how they've managed to contain things as well, aside from a few blips. But and that's what COVID sort of has been for the majority of Western Australians, a bit of a blip up till now. We only really had that one big lockdown back in March 2020. That was kind of about 6 weeks or so, which disrupted school, and we've had a couple of small things since then, but nothing like we're seeing anywhere else over East or around the world. And I think that that's made people here complacent. So, whilst you every now and then will see a person with a mask on, it's the rarity. And we kind of look at them thinking, what are you doing that for? You don't need to do that. But the fact is that the borders will open, and we will have to get accustomed to it. But I think the case study point of view is the fact that we did return to pre-COVID normal very quickly. And even when we have these blips, we just still revert back to pre-COVID normal every time. It's not like anyone's learning a lesson. We're kind of not, every time we have another week lockdown, we're not going, oh, we better start thinking about this seriously. We just go, oh, well, that was our week and now we're back to normal.
Yeah.
And so it will be a rude shock and a rude awakening to a lot of people and businesses when we have COVID in our community, which we will have.
Absolutely. And Jo and I were talking before I pressed record, and I shared an insight. So a lot of organizations, when I speak with them, I was telling Jo, say, oh, no, but we're ready. Everyone can take their laptop home. But it's beyond that. When we're talking about culture, especially when we're talking about leadership, when we're talking about best practice management and inclusivity and all of the above. So I don't feel we're ready from my perspective in Western Australia for what's to come. And I really like the fact that you mentioned, Jo, that, yeah, we may well have had lockdowns in the past, but we keep on reverting back to old days. We're still not learning. We're still not evolving, from a workplace perspective. Okay.
It's interesting because one of the things that I comment, in the introduction to the book is that when COVID happened in 2020, yeah. we had to move fast, and we did just send people home with a laptop, and we did just say, right, have you got internet? You've got a desk, you're all good, like go. And then we just brought them back into the office, here in Western Australia. Yeah. And the only organisations that I've noticed that are really doing long-term things are not the only ones, but the predominant ones are global organisations. Yeah. Where they are having to deal with COVID in a massive scale wherever they are in the world. And so they're implementing the same restrictions and requirements globally. So, you will see some businesses having to wear masks because that is their global requirement, or even national businesses. So those businesses that are just national across Australia but are having to deal with big lockdowns in Sydney and Melbourne, they're having to make changes over there. And they're, of course, saying, well, we can't just do it here. We're going to make this a national thing and putting in place those policies for the longer term. But the businesses that are not affected elsewhere, they are just doing what they have normally done. And it's still surprising to me. I remember talking to a client last year who was saying, oh, we can't wait for everyone to get back into the office. We want everyone back into the office. It's really important for us. And the type of business that they were is what made me laugh. They were a software business.
Come on.
Like, they are the #1 entity that is built for remote and flexible and hybrid working, and yet they were dead set that everybody needed to come back to the office.
Oh my gosh, we really need to change mindsets. Now, studies have shown that this works. I'm not even going to bang on about studies. I think people know. But there's so many stats out there about how remote work, how flexible, how hybrid work, it works. We know that. There's no surprises about it. Can I ask you what your predictions are once our borders do open? Because I foresee that happening next year. It's going to have to happen.
So I mean, the interesting things right now is that the whole of Australia is dealing with the mandatory vaccination requirements. Right. So that's the big issue that I'm hearing a lot right now. You know, all the questions, you know, do we have to get our employees to vaccinate, and what happens if they refuse to vaccinate? Leaving that aside, then the next thing will be, okay, we've now got, you know, COVID coming in because our borders are opening. Safety, workplace safety becomes the big issue. And it's going to be around that deal of, you know, well, how do we make sure we're protecting the safety of our employees at work? And one of the easy ways to do that is to not have them come into places where they're going to be in contact with others. So I think that when we start to see COVID in the community and we start to see community transmission, and when employers start to realise that they are responsible for that transmission in their workplace, and that potentially leads to workers' compensation claims and other issues, then they will start to say, oh, well, maybe we need to do something about this. And then they will look at what other mechanisms that they can put in place. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be everybody must work from home forever, but it is, how do we manage it? And, you know, one of the great examples were businesses like BHP and the other miners who were doing things like saying, right, we're going to have the A-B shifts. You know, so you've got the A team and the B team, and then every time A team's in the office, B team's at home, and there's a massive clean of the whole office before B team come in, and then we see the changeover. So everyone's getting time to be in the office, but also be at home. And it means that if there's community transition in the office, only one of those teams goes out, you know.
That's a brilliant practical example. And I'm really hearing, so what you said about the first part, so people will change if or when, you know, there's workers' compensation issues and blah, blah, blah. And that's a really, really reactive way for an organization to respond to something that we can be proactive with. So from a proactive perspective at the moment, Jo, what are your thoughts? How can Western Australian organizations especially, which is what I'm talking to, be proactive right now?
I think they need to do that forward planning, as you say. So they need to look at it and say, okay, well, what have we done in terms of vaccinations? What are the requirements on us? What requirements, if there are no mandatory requirements, what are we choosing to put in place for our workers? Are we going to mandate it for our workplace? Then they need to look at some of the structures that they've had in place before, and do a bit of analysis, you know, what worked, what didn't work. And if it didn't work, you know, if they are one of those businesses that say, well, we did working from home and it just didn't work, why? You know, what were the actual challenges? And then talk to your people, as we so as we're always saying, do some consulting, you know, actually do some surveys of the staff. What do they want? You know, we're hearing all the time now the great resignation is coming, and we have to be prepared for people who are wanting more flexibility, and they're going to start asking for it, or perhaps they won't even ask, because if they feel that the organisation that they're working in is never going to give it to them, then why ask, right?
Indeed.
So the organisation does, as you say, need to be proactive now to set the expectations. You know, what does the business expect of the employees? What do the employees expect of the business? And, you know, we need to come together and rejig that for what is going to be a whole new thing to deal with next year.
100%, Joe. And what I'm coming across as well with the proactive organizations who are trying to get ahead of the game is a lot of them are focusing on developing their teams to be cohesive units right now while they're in the workplace. So I'm doing some wonderful work with the proactive organizations in really getting the teams to get to know each other, to find out what their team brand is, how they want to be recognized and known for the future, and getting them ready for the pandemic, essentially. That's one thing. And then other thing I'm helping organizations with, Joe, is getting the managers ready to have a baseline, to get ready for managing in a hybrid world, because that is so, so, so different also, isn't it?
Yeah, so in the book that I wrote, I take people through a 6-step process.
Right.
So that first step is exactly what you just described around the vision, like what do you want your remote work, well, not your remote workforce, but what do you want your workplace to look like into the future? What is your vision of it? Do you anticipate yourself being at what I call the top of the pyramid, where everyone is completely distributed? Or do you see yourself at what I call the bottom of the pyramid, which is everybody working together in a central location all the time? So there is no working from home. Or somewhere in the middle, you're doing some remote, some hybrid, some other flexible work options. Where do you want to be? And I'm not saying everybody has to be, remote at all. Your point of difference as an organization might be that you are fully centered in an office all the time. And that's the kind of workplace that you want to create, and you want to attract those people who want to work in a team together all the time. And if that's what you want, fine, but just go through the process of visioning your future and acknowledge that. And if that's what you want, commit to it, rather than doing a try hard effort of, sure, we're flexible. Yeah. And then people come in and they go, this is not flexible. You haven't given me anything that I wanted. So that's where I always say people need to start, and then they need to work through, okay, analyze the roles that people have. Can they work in a different way? Do they have to be centralized? Moving through into coming up with the key terms. So, what are the responsibilities and the expectations if someone's working remotely? How do we need to change their contracts of employment? What policies do we need to put in place? How do we make sure they're safe when they're working from home? Dealing with those issues. And then, making offers to your individuals. So changing their terms. And then, exactly as you said, Prina, the managers, making sure that those managers know how to deal with it, because some managers aren't good managers when they're in the office, let alone when people aren't physically present. So that's a key issue. And then finally, the 6th step is always to evaluate. Like anything that we do, we need to make sure that what we're doing is going to have the result that we intended. So going back to the vision and then looking at, did I do what I thought I was going to do?
Absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant, Jo. Another thing in terms of the practical aspects that I talk to a lot of my clients about is for them to consider the output of an individual versus the 9 to 5. They are very different things. One person might be able to bang out their job or the project in 3 hours versus 7.5 hours. So really shifting your mentality about that. I know we have to work under awards and legislations and blah 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 blah, but we can really question the way of working. We're in such a lucky place at the moment where we've got a blank slate. Is how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, and you point out a key challenge, which is what the law provides. And, it's one thing to talk about the where we work, and then it's a totally another thing to talk about the when we work. Because, if you've got overtime requirements for weekends, but your employee is telling you that they want to work on the weekend, or they want to work at 10 o'clock at night because it suits their lifestyle, but you have to sort of say, oh, but I can't let you do that, because then I have to pay you twice as much as I normally would. Or then there's the how people work too. So maybe they like to do things in a different way. And does it really matter if the output is what you're looking for?
Right. That's it. Creative thinking can be 4 or whatever hours. The output can be 3 hours. There's different ways of doing it. You also, so I'm taking lots of notes while you were talking, Jo. You also mentioned the Great Resignation. I feel like it's already here. So a lot of I I think it's here. I will honestly say 4 of my coaches, ex-coaches, have over the last 3 or 4 months quit and moved on to amazing, amazing opportunities. So it's already a candidates market here in Western Australia.
Yes, it is.
Because of the fact that our borders are closed, we don't have, those visas that we relied on and international migration or people from the other states of Australia coming in. We have a little pool and talent, if you know your talent, already moving on and doing things about whatever they need to for the future of their careers. They're already taking their careers into their own hands, I feel.
Yes. Oh, I agree. I think there's been a movement towards flexibility for quite some time.
Yeah.
2020 and the pandemic just kickstarted a flood of people moving towards it. So while people might have been dabbling or seeking a few things, this just picked everybody up. So we've seen it in the legal industry.
Yeah,
whereas traditionally a lot of people are wanting to, work in larger firms. We're seeing an exodus from that, and we're seeing a lot more people start up sole practices. So they're just one lawyer working on their own, starting their own businesses. There's a lot of that happening.
Yeah.
And that has been coming for a while, as we've seen the pressures in the legal industry and all of that in terms of well-being, and they're looking for well-being and flexibility, so they're getting out. But what I think might happen is that with this concept of the Great Resignation and these businesses seeing that people can go out and be solopreneurs or do their own thing, they're having to look at that and say, okay, well, how do we keep those people? What is it that they're looking for? And I think there will be plenty of people who've gone out on the solopreneur journey who have actually said, you know what, I don't actually like running a business. I like the freedom, I like the flexibility, but I don't like running a business. So how can I have the things I want in someone else's business?
Brilliant point, which I had not even considered. So businesses do have an opportunity there to take back some people who may have dabbled in what we do. Okay, so wow, that's a great point. How can go on? Carry on.
There's statistics too around how long people last in business.
Yeah.
And one of the statistics is the first year, and then the 3 years, and then the 5 years, and then the 10 years. How long are you going to last? People come up with this idea that they want to create their own thing, but it doesn't always meet their reality.
Indeed, but imagine.
Their wishes.
Yeah, but imagine recruiting someone who is of that sort, who's gone out there, taken that risk. They're innovative, they're creative, they're a risk taker, in a safe space. Wouldn't any organization want someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's that whole intrapreneur versus entrepreneur, so where if someone's dabbled in entrepreneurship and then gone, oof, I actually liked being in a team, in someone else's, helping someone else grow their business, then they've done that and they know that and they're stronger for it, I think, as well.
100%. Brilliant, Jo. I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I've got one more question for you, and it's the magic question that I ask everyone. If I gave you a magic wand, what is one way that you would change the way of the workplace?
So difficult when you give the one requirement, and I'd be tempted to say something about the laws, but I think that if I really could make one change, it would be around the managers that you were talking about. One of the things I always like to say to my managers when I'm coaching and delivering training sessions like you is to say, when you tell someone what they're doing wrong or what's not quite going right, you're doing them a favor. You're actually helping them, because if you don't tell them what they're doing wrong, how can they improve and do better? And if they don't improve and do better, then the ultimate reaction to that is going to be that they lose their job. And so if you have the power as a manager to make a difference in that person's life by telling them early and telling them well, communicating well what things aren't quite right and how they can do better. And so I would wave that wand so that all managers just knew that in their mind and felt therefore confident to communicate with their people, what's going wrong.
Beautiful. And it's okay to do so if you do it in, you know, a safe space and in the right way, when it's timely and respectful and all of that. I remember when I was early in my people management career, Joe, and I had to give my first piece of feedback, and I was just so nervous because it was someone who was in my team who I thoroughly respected and valued, but they just needed to increase things. They needed to up their game. And, you know, I prepared for it with the formula that you gave and delivered the feedback. And his response to me was, thank you. Because if I don't know, I don't grow.
Exactly. Yes.
That was
And
it.
that's exactly I used a line very like that
Yeah.
in the book. It's kind of like, you want to train your managers to be helping someone grow in their role. You know, they need to learn, they need to develop. And if you never tell them anything, then how can you expect them to? And it's you know, most of the issues that we deal with is, as employment lawyers, you know, we do a lot of work in the proactive space, you know, training and encouraging. But of course, we still get a lot of, oh my God, calls, this has just happened, and how do I deal with this person? And so many times it all comes back to communication. It's what someone hasn't said. Most often, sometimes it's how they said it, but most often it's what they haven't said.
Wow. Simple, hey?
But hard. Simple but hard.
Simple but hard. Jo, I feel like I could talk to you forever, and I think this conversation is going to continue in various other forums and other ways. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Prina. Thank you.
And Jo, another thing, if people want to get in touch with you, I'm going to put all of your details in our show notes.
Great.
Is the best way to connect with you on LinkedIn first off?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a really good way, or they can find me on my website as well.
Cool. Okay. Thank you so much, Jo.
Thanks, Prina.